vision, leadership, workplace-related topics. The Voices of Victory podcast show. Subscribe today. Let's go.
Vision, leadership, self-esteem, workplace-related topics.
Subscribe.
The Voices of Victory podcast show.
Voices of Victory.
Vision,
Voices of Victory.
leadership,
Voices of Victory.
workplace-related topics.
The Voices of Victory.
Voices of Victory. Voices of Victory. Voices of Victory.
It's time for the show. You are now listening to the Voices of Victory podcast show.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mario Di Leone.
And hello and welcome to Voices of Victory podcast show. My name is Mario Di Leone, and today we have someone very special on the show, Kay VanDunk from KVanDunk.com. Kay, welcome to the show. I wanted to welcome you and then bring you on this show and have a nice, fun discussion. Can you tell me just a little bit about who you are and your background and what it is you do?
Sure. Hi, Mario. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm Kay VanDunk. I'm a love attraction coach, and I help women who are over 30, north of 30, who are looking for their soulmate, learn steps on how to attract them in. And that based mostly off of my certification, but also I'm so passionate about this work because I met my husband through this work, and it made me so passionate to learn how to do it so I can teach other women how to do the same thing.
Well, that's pretty awesome. Well, welcome to the show. It's always a pleasure to talk about these things. It's also a pleasure to bring this topic out. This is going to be one of those topics that really opens up people's eyes to the concept of, let's say, a soulmate or love attraction overall. What I wanted to do was actually kind of bring to the table really quickly for you seven key points as to when it comes to a person that is considered to be, let's say, a love attraction or a soulmate. I have 7 key points with that, and I'd like to share them. Would you like to hear them?
Of course.
All right, sounds good. So, well, the first thing that I want to bring to the table is that I'm going to give you these 7 reasons or 7 key points, and they're really meant to be with that person. In other words, when I say meant to be, I mean in the sense of a soulmate, that soulmates are meant to be, right?
Right.
And I want to bring this idea to the table that we want to make sure that it's not necessarily a projected fantasy, but coming from a grounded place. So that's what I'm going to bring out right now is I'm going to bring out these 7 key points, but to get people to understand they should be in a grounded point of view. Now, I want to make sure that we are real and grounded in present time, and we're not, quote unquote, projecting anything into the future. So being grounded in reality is basically the overall arching importance of what I'm going to say. And the first key point I want to bring to the table, and we can even discuss some of these, is the first key point is you tell each other secrets and be vulnerable without judging each other. Okay? That's one that I actually see. Now, the second one is when you argue, you actually bounce back without disrespect and without bitterness.
I think that's a biggie. That's a really good one.
Okay, the third one is that the chemistry is undeniable. It's not something you can deny. It's kind of straightforward, right? And the fourth one is that there's no pretending, okay? There's complete authentic nature present, that there's a sense of authenticity. Neither one of them have to manage their impressions or hide who they are, right? Which is great. And the fifth one is that they inspire you to grow even though it's uncomfortable. If it's uncomfortable, they could actually inspire you to grow. It's kind of like they say, couples that work out together grow together, or stay together, right? That sort of thing. So, they can work together. They can grow together. They might make each other feel comfortable, but they still push one another to actually grow. They both elevate one another. It's from a soul level, if you will. And the next one, which is really a bell ringer, is you feel like you've known them there's this deja vu sense, like you've known them before, like you've met before in some other life or some other point in time, right?
Right.
And the last one is when you actually think of them, or if you think of your home life, home quarters, wherever you live, they come to mind. So if you think about where you live, their face comes to mind. There's this sense of I'm feeling at home with that person. There's a level of comfort there, right? So
I totally agree.
awesome. Now I want to kind of bring to the table some questions for you. I want to hit you with one of our questions. Is that what is your perspective on the role of attraction in building a lasting relationship?
Physical attraction or energetic attraction?
A little bit of both. Let's touch down on both.
I prioritize energetic attraction. So this is someone you're meeting on a soul level, right? That's half of the word is your soul.
Yep.
So it has to be very, very foundational to how you're meeting your soulmate. Of course, like you said, you're meeting your soulmate from a grounded place and you're pulling in someone who meets you where they are emotionally is similar to where you are emotionally. Now, of course, you have to look at this person and spend time with them. So they should be attractive to you physically in that sense. But attraction is not the starting point. Attraction is the round out of what you're looking for when you're looking for love. Because at the end of the day, looks can fade, looks can completely change over time. But who is that person on a soul level, on an energetic level? That's who you should be focusing on attracting to you.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on that one. When it comes to the concept of connection, where people are connecting, right? How does someone distinguish from, let's say, that genuine deep love versus, let's say, infatuation? When they're navigating a new connection, how do they discern that difference?
Early on in the relationship, I'm just going to be bold and say it's not love. It's infatuation all the way, right? Love comes with certain markers of how is this person shown up for you? How do you show up for them? What is your goals? What are your mindset? What are you working together towards? That's when you kind of start seeing things that you love about someone.
Yeah.
Early on, infatuation is, I would say, from a place of attention and, like we said before, a little bit of the physical, right? You really like this person, but what do you know about them that you could love? Early in the relationship, there is nothing there to pull from to know that you would love someone. So you really have to give a little bit of time and really be patient and don't rush into being, the first person to say that rushing into love as your mindset, because you really want to take time to let things develop and see how this person shows up in the relationship first.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I could definitely understand. They're going to, people obviously going to be navigating new connections, and there's a lot of things that come up as green flags and red flags. And I'm sure towards the end, I'll probably discuss like a lot of red flags and stuff. One green flag that I can see as it relates to love would be unconditional acceptance, right? That it basically says like, I love my partner, flaws and all right? They love the messy parts too, right? Would you agree? There's some truth. How do you feel about that?
Fully, if you're a person showing up in a relationship, however you show up, even if you're a work in progress, you're still wholly a person. So you're attracting someone who's also showing up a little bit flawed. And that's part of who they are. And that's part of what you have to work through.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And when it comes to unconditional acceptance, I look at it like, okay, I love my partner, flaws and all. But that also lends us to a really cool idea is that we should not try to mold them, right? I mean, you've probably seen that before, is that people try to mold, they try to mold their partner into an ideal, right? Into a particular ideal. And that includes, like we have to respect their individuality and support their growth, right? So there's a sense of unconditional acceptance where we accept them for who they are, the messy parts too, the flaws and all. We don't try to mold them or shape them into some projected idea. And it respects their individuality and we support their growth. So when I say respect individuality, allowing that space to breathe, right? Right? Would you agree on that? Like, what do you think when it comes to the space to breathe, what have you seen or understood about when there's a love attraction and space really isn't honored. How does that go down in your eyes?
Well, it can show up as being maybe a little bit clingy. It can show up as being your insecurity not allowing you to give the person a little bit of space. And that's not love, right? That's just being a little bit overprotective, maybe even jealous or envy. You have to kind of take a step back and realize this is the person who chose you and you chose this person.
Right.
And you really have to step back and give it space to do itself. You don't have to micromanage love.
Yeah, I agree. There's no micromanagement there. And that does kind of take us over to the idea of emotional security, right? Is that with true love, we feel safe being vulnerable, right? There's a safety there. There's a mutual trust. And of course, both partners express themselves honestly without this fear of being rejected, right? And that's kind of what it boils down to. So there's that mutual trust. And it's like, hey, I trust that person can express themselves fully, right? They can be themselves fully as well, which is important, right?
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to love attraction, let's talk mutual respect, because obviously, a lot of red flags can come up when mutual respect is not honored entirely. And how does that look in terms of respecting the other person, their boundaries, their choices, right? Because would you agree that love honors an individuality? It doesn't try to totally overpower or belittle the other person?
Well, yeah, because at the end of the day, you are with someone because of what you found attractive in them at the moment you met them. So if you go against that, then what really are you attracted to? If you're trying to mold someone into something else, or you feel like they're deficient in some way, is that the person you should be with? Like, I feel like, you have to take a step back and realize that you're not forcing anything on anyone. If they are never, ever going to change anything about them, is this the person that you still want to show up for? And is this the person that you would still consider your soulmate? Of course, we all have room to grow. I'm not saying that we're all perfect, but if you step into a relationship with someone and automatically you're nitpicking at things and you're pushing past what they do and don't like, and just everything about you, everything about them seems a little bit off, that might be your first signal that you're not with the right person.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Now, that really does bring some very that brings a lot of clarity. Put it that way. It brings a lot of clarity to the whole idea. Now, when it comes, a good key point that I want to touch on, which I feel is almost generational. Generational means not every generation will embrace it the same way, and that is sacrifice. Okay, some people would sacrifice for their partners, and other ones may not. What's your thoughts on that in terms of, because some people look at sacrifice as being too big, right? And when is it safe to make that sacrifice too? That's the other thing. It's like if you meet someone right away and you start sacrificing things right away, it kind of be really overwhelming energetically. It can be really overwhelming to the other person. What's your thoughts on that in terms of making healthy sacrifices?
I think healthy sacrifice can come with commitment, right? You're not rushing into a relationship and making a sacrifice for someone. It should be a give and take, compromise. But until that person has shown you some level of commitment, whatever that looks like for you, right? It doesn't need to be marriage. But when you both agree that this is something we want to move forward with, and this is something you're going to focus on and commit to, then we could talk about sacrifice. I personally feel like sacrifice can be used in ways in a relationship that are a little manipulative. So you have to always have an eye out for what are the motivations? What do you stand to lose? What does the other person stand to gain? At what point will this be evened out? I personally think that that's something that comes with time in a relationship, and it's not something that should be rushed into.
That's awesome. And I want to bring to the table that I'm going to bring this out right here, right now. That is exactly why you do what you do with coaching, right? It's because of this reason. It's this reason that it is to my belief that every human being on the planet has things they push away. Those are called aversions,
right,
and blind spots that other people don't see. So in other words, the fact that you're a coach is very empowering, because what that does is it shows up about leadership, right? How you lead in your relationships and the concept of relationship, right?
Right.
But the beauty of it is understanding understanding that people that enter relationships, they may have a blind spot. They may not see the relationship clearly. And that's where your value actually comes in. Because when you work with them, you start to help them realize certain things that they're not able to see.
Right.
Okay. And by the way, that blind spot can be in a variety of areas of life. For example, that blind spot could be money. That blind spot could be health. They could literally be blind to what they're supposed to do health wise, right? They hear all this information out there and they're not really quite sure where to go or what to do, right? And when it comes to relationships, the beauty of what you do is being able to shine that light with them and say, let's look at this in a very clear picture. So I think that's one thing that's really awesome about that. Now,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And I think you know what it is too. Sometimes you have maybe a limited circle of people around you to kind of bounce relationship thoughts and questions around. But will they necessarily tell you, ooh, it looks like you're the problem? Some people just want to sugarcoat things to make you feel good because that's your sister or your best friend or what have you. They may not want to go there with you or hurt your feelings or even shine that light back to you. So I feel like in a sense, what I help people do is really see what you're saying versus what you're doing and how are you showing up.
Right. And what I like about your approach is there's a level of fairness in the way you're looking at things, or not the way you're looking at it, but the way you're helping them look at it with fairness, with eyes of fairness. And I think that's so important because there's this balance in relationships that work out pretty well. For example, let's talk about like selflessness. We talked about sacrifice, right? But let's talk about selflessness. Acts of selflessness, like putting your partner's needs ahead of your own, could almost kind of be looked at by sacrificing your own needs, but not to the extent of losing yourself, if you will, right? There's a healthy level of selflessness. Now, it's common with true love because it's about giving freely, but not out of obligation and not out of guilt, right? So when in relationships, when it's time to step into that place of being selfless, right? Obviously, they don't want to do it too fast, too soon. We all know that when you do things too fast, too soon, too hard, it can all crumble like a house of cards in relationships. It can crumble very quickly, right?
Yeah.
So that's where you save people the grief, right?
Yeah, and
really, yeah. Go ahead, continue.
And help sidestep resentment because that's what ultimately it will lead to. Like in every relationship, there's balance, and there's some things that you are going to be able to do for your partner from a place of true love, but also, like you said, selflessness. It's not every single thing in the relationship. It might be one or two things that you've decided, you know what, this is how I'm going to support my partner. And the right partner will say and do the same thing for you. So it's not everything all day, every single time, but there's a few areas where you feel like, my partner really, really needs me and this is how I'll show up. That's completely healthy. But like you said, you can do it in the wrong way and then end up feeling like you're maybe being taken advantage of.
Right.
Or things are uneven in the relationship, and that can lead to real resentment.
Like you've given too much and you're not feeling any reciprocation. It's pretty awesome that you bring it up. I always talk about my castle principle on the show. You may not have heard it. Okay. I talk about the castle principle between two people is that, I'm like a castle, you're like a castle, right? And in order for you to come into my world and experience my internal treasure, the treasure of my soul, the treasure of who I am, well, I'm going to have a boundary. That's my drawbridge, right? I'm going to have my little drawbridge that's there, right? And in order to enter into my kingdom, there is kind of a token of trust. And that token of trust is not just to enter my kingdom, but also for me to enter your kingdom. You know what I mean? Because you're a castle, I'm a castle. Both of us has to lower our drawbridge, and there's got to be a mutual exchange, almost like a handshaking or an agreement that goes on where the trust goes back and forth. They say trust begets trust, right? They say that it kind of giving a little bit of trust can push trust, towards you, right? How does that work when when a person is dating in the beginning and, they're getting to know the other person, they want to be able to build that trust in a healthy way, right? But how much is too much? Like, if you could shed some light on not the do's and don'ts, but the slippery slope of giving out too much trust too soon.
So I think one thing to always keep in mind is boundaries are our friend. So you have to come into the relationship knowing this is what I do and don't want to to share so early on with someone, because really you don't really know this person yet if you're so new in the relationship.
Right.
So it's not a matter of breadcrumbing, but paying attention in certain situations and seeing how this person reacts. You want to be able to feel comfortable with decisions that they're making when the stakes are very low and it almost doesn't matter, so that can guide you in how to be more open in situations that do require a little bit more depth and a little bit more openness on your part, right? Because it's not necessary in most situations for you to give so much early on in the relationship to move things forward. That's not why you do it.
Right.
You do it for clarity, you do it for openness, but not to pull someone in. You're being trusting with someone because this is someone that you're hoping will be in your life long term. So you do want to give them opportunities to show you that they are trustworthy. But you also want to make sure that you're watching the other things that they're doing along the way to see if it aligns with what you're hoping for as an outcome, what your goals are, what your values are.
That's wow. That's pretty profound. Thank you. That opens up a wonderful avenue. You know, for true love to occur, both have to grow as individuals. They still have to grow as individuals, even though they're, let's say, going to help each other grow. They still have to have a life and grow individually. I think
Absolutely.
what tends to happen is I think some people dive into a relationship and they forfeit their own individual growth because they're giving way too much towards that other partner, too much, too soon, too fast, that they lose sight. They lose sight of their own needs, if you will. So what's your thoughts on that, where if the person is going so deep and quick into the relationship that they actually lose sight of their own needs, right? It creates almost like an imbalance. By wanting to give so much, they lose sight, almost to the point where I've heard people say this before. They say, I don't know who I am. Like they literally lose their identity through the partner, through the other person. What's been your thoughts on that in terms of seeing stuff like that?
Well, when I see it, it usually is an outcropping of someone having people-pleasing tendencies anyway. It's, people who want to be validated and be liked because they're doing and because they're giving. And even if they're not that way in every single relationship in their life, it shows up in dating-wise because this is the one that is the highest stakes, right? You already have your friends. You don't have to impress your friend. You already have your siblings or your parents. You don't have to impress them anymore. But this is somebody new. This is somebody who could potentially be the person you spend the rest of your life with. So it can make you want to do in the hopes that the person will say, you know what, I really like this. You are awesome. I want to be with you. When in reality, it could scare the wrong person away, which is always the perfect thing.
Right.
But it could also make you feel as though now you have to keep this level of giving and doing to keep the relationship going. And that's really not where you should be coming from in any relationship, really, but especially not with your soulmate, because this kind of love doesn't demand that.
Right. Absolutely. And you know what? This brings us to the concept of balanced independence. So like for two people, for true love to actually truly exist, for it to be present, would be to allow personal space for independence, but that independence requires their own growth. Like you have your growth, they have theirs. And you're not taking away from their independence. They're not taking away from yours. Each partner kind of maintains their identity and their interests outside of the relationship and the efforts that they actually make. Does that sound pretty clear, right? Does that sound like that makes sense?
And it sounds like a healthy relationship, right? Who doesn't want a relationship where at the end of the day, you kind of go and have your hobbies and your interests and you focus on yourself and your partner does the same. And then you come back together stronger, more fortified than you were initially.
Yeah.
That's a strong, healthy relationship.
Absolutely. And the efforts that we make in relationships, that, whatever effort that we're putting through, there's a lot of power in it. That power that exists is that there's these small, consistent actions over time. But the whole point of these actions, right, is to demonstrate that they value the connection, right?
Right.
Is that like, hopefully that lands the plane a great deal, because they're not just making efforts because they're, bored, you know what I mean? Like there's some people that maybe make efforts for the wrong reasons, right? Like, you know what I mean? It becomes a give take. It is an exchange, if you will. It is an actual exchange. But I'd like to say that when it comes to consistent effort, the point is really to demonstrate like, hey, I really enjoy spending time with you. I'd like to do it. You know what I communication from a healthy place, right? And that brings us to the word healthy communication, right? Now, communication has to be respectful. And as you know, communication is literally the hallmark of true love. Okay. It's the hallmark of literally soulmate concept, right? The idea of a soulmate, because partners have to be able to discuss the issues. It's got to be constructive. They have to seek resolution together. It's more about building bridges than it is destroying them. It's more about fostering love and connection than absolutely like who has to be right. Blame and hostility and the person that says, well, I have to be right. I have to be have that last word. Not realizing that, I use this phrase often is that, especially with some men, is they want to win the war, but then lose the battle. So I want to be right, but at the risk of losing the person or damaging the relationship entirely. What's your thoughts on just healthy communication as to kind of keeping, because listen, isn't this about love? We have to stoke the fire of love, the passion, right, that goes on. What's your idea of that in a healthy communication framework?
In health, like in building a relationship, I don't care if you meet on an app or if you're introduced through friends or you've known this person for years, you're basing your growth in the relationship on what you're telling your partner early on and what they're telling you. And healthy communication is as simple as starting a conversation from a viewpoint of love for this person and respect for this person, and not coming with anger and negativity. Even in an angry moment, you have to still remember this is somebody who cares about you and that you care about.
Yeah.
And over time, as your relationship grows, your conversations get deeper. You start talking about things beyond just, the get to know you questions like what's your favorite band and where did you go to school? These are the questions that guide your relationship and really deepen the relationship that you have over time. And it's so critical. It's so critical to growing, because if you're with this person for, say, decades, you want to be able to have a conversation with your partner 40 years from now that's really full of fun and interest and love. And even when you're arguing and disagreeing on things, to still come back to a place of mutual respect for each other.
Yeah, that's huge. Mutual respect is like absolutely huge to me. It's always, it's one of my own little tenets, is that, and it's not something that has to be demanded. They say love isn't demanding, right? That's kind of like, that's kind of like some tenets I live by, is that I always say this is almost like my love mantra. Love me without fear, trust me without wondering, love me without restriction, and love me without demand, right? That's kind of literally like, that's my personal mantra for like relationship, be able to see past those things, because to love without demand is important, right? Love me without wondering. Well, that means there's some trust there, having that developed, and that gets developed. It's not trust. You can't just have instant trust, add water. Like, it doesn't work that way.
At all.
At all. There's a level of work. There's a level of effort. And what happens today, and I'm sure you would agree this too, is that, in the dating world and on dating apps, it's easier for people to swipe right than it is to actually go through the hard work and effort and conflict resolution in order to generate a solid relationship. Again, this is all about kind of demonstrating that they value the relationship, showing up with empathy, showing up with compassion, right? Connecting on a non-superficial level. Like, I don't care who you binge watch, but it's nice to know what your values are and what your vision is. Like, what do you vision for the future and what do you value in a relationship? And again, some of the things I wanted to discuss is, value matching, right? A strong alignment in core values, life goals, in vision, right? I believe that is a marker of true love in terms of alignment, because there's a sense of unity and a shared purpose. I mean, this is why some power couples actually make it. What do you say? I'd love to say, what do you say about that?
Because that's their goal. And believe it or not, the amount of people who early on in the dating stages are not having these conversations still continues to blow my mind. Like, what are you talking about if you're not trying to assess this person's alignment with who you are? And of course, you're not spending every single moment of a date getting into the weeds with someone.
Right.
But you should be moving the conversations forward to understand this alignment. And like you said, you look at some couples and you say, this is just really interesting pairing of, say, a power couple. But you know what? They both have the same goal, which is to be power couple. So it works for them.
Yeah.
And everyone that's not not a match for that person falls away. And it has to be the same when you approach the early stages of dating. What is your alignment with this person and what they're saying? And if there's something that's just not a match and is multiple things, that's your red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that, listen, couples and partners, they make mistakes. Okay. So we know that mistakes are inevitable. Like you and I could agree on that, right?
Yeah, of course.
True love does show up through forgiveness and understanding, right?
Right.
And there is an old phrase, there's a very old phrase, and it's used in business, but could also be used in relationships, is don't seek to be understood, seek to understand first, right? And that's kind of seek to understand your partner first rather than to be understood right away. There's some people that are could be so leaning on the arrogant side to oh no, she has to understand me. No, seek to understand them first, because this is about resolving conflict, not holding grudges, and not seeking revenge. These are things that when mistakes occur, we know that trust is part of it. So when mistakes happen, it's about, you have to go into what I call rebuilding mode, the ability to rebuild. If there's if you value that relationship, you have to go into that mode of rebuilding. What's your insight in terms of your professional opinion, in terms of the mistakes being inevitable, rebuilding trust and forgiveness? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it goes for me back to the golden rule. How would you like to be dealt with in a situation where you've made a mistake, where you've done something wrong? And that's how you approach your partner. And some mistakes are bigger than others. Some mistakes are fixable. And at the end of the day, if you can come to your partner with a sense of, we're going to work on understanding what happened, understanding if this is a deficit in our relationship or something that can be repaired, and how can we repair this together, right? What work do we have to do? Do I have to do maybe separately apart from my partner? And what work can we do together to fix this? Because there's no mistake that is so big that it doesn't have one of two outcomes, whether it's ending the relationship or moving forward. But when you're with your soulmate, your goal is always to move forward, because this is someone who is coming to you from a place of love and maybe even openness in
openness.
admitting the mistake.
Yeah.
And you have to be always willing to work together towards the greater goal of preserving your relationship.
Yeah, I agree. And you can even ask your partner, hey, I feel we need to work through this. We didn't land the plane on it. We need to work through it, And now that comes down, we talked about the castle principle, where reciprocity, you understand, reciprocity is that trust is a token. It's a token in the sense, it's a piece of value, right? So in order for a person to enter my kingdom, I have to kind of get that trust token from them, but I also have to be able to give it back so they could let down their drawbridge, right? Which is their boundaries, if you will. And that comes down to being reciprocal or reciprocity, right? Both partners have to contribute equally. They have to ensure that neither feels taken for granted, because if they're taken for granted, it's not a good sign. You're going to get resentment. If someone feels like they're taken for granted, it usually means resentment is not too far behind. It's not too far behind. Now, in terms of challenges, okay, so we know that true love, as you and I know it, persists through hardship, right? And what you and I can understand is that nowadays, because it's so easy to swipe right, there's some people that are unwilling, literally unwilling. They're either unwilling to persist through hardship, or they may not have the fortitude to persist through hardship, or they may not have the conflict resolution skills to persist through all that, to face those difficulties, because you're going to face difficulties together, right? It's about providing that support and encouragement rather than abandoning the relationship, which happens all the time. This is why ghosting is real. People ghost. And I do believe that ghosting, me personally, I've spoken about it on the show, that ghosting is literally an epic fail that connects itself to a lack of courage, all right? Or a lack of communication, or they simply feel, well, I don't really owe them anything, so why bother, right? Why bother? I don't need to share anything, And they've been slighted, they've been hurt, and the ghosting becomes a weapon. When it comes to dating and text messaging, a lot of impression management goes on, where people type certain things only to manage their impression as to how they're perceived by the other person. And I believe, and I'm sure you would agree too, is that when you meet with someone face to face, the beauty of that is you get to see them for who they really are, because there's body language, because there's tonality, right? We get to see them good for who they are. And not only that, but the relationship might feel very natural and comfortable in person, right? There's not a sense of effort and going on. So what's your thoughts on persisting through hardship? Because I think a lot of folks out there need to hear that. They're afraid to persist through that. What's your thoughts?
I think we're all people and people meeting other people. So if you are genuinely looking to be in a relationship, you have to understand that there's going to be ups and downs. And I don't care if that's with your soulmate or with someone you think is your soulmate or someone you're just having fun with. If you know that you want a serious relationship, some of those things are not going to be fun, right? Everything is not candy and rainbows. And
that's good.
And it's not. And you have to be willing to put in work because the early phases of a relationship, like you said, it's easy to walk away from when someone doesn't look exactly like what you want. But you have to meet people, heart to heart. Yeah. This is, before you know that this person is your soulmate early in the dating phase, you're with somebody who could at the very least be a potential friend. Yeah. So would you discard a budding friendship this quickly? I wouldn't. I think if there's somebody who, for whatever reason, you decided was worth your time and effort and energy to get to know better, then give them a few chances to see who they are. Because like you said, it's really easy to dismiss somebody over, the internet. And think now with the advent of AI, how easy it is to manipulate how you show up in the beginning stages of a relationship. Yeah. You can have a chat bot create an entire persona for you, but then you meet this person on a date and it's a mismatch. Yeah. So you have to be willing to meet people and get out and see who they are.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what's even more powerful too? This is where I do tend to see red flags. So to me in dating, a behavioral red flag is the inability to get on a voice call, right? The inability, right? Because they're trying to manage their impression, right? So they're afraid to get on a voice call and act. There's no courage there to actually speak. But the tone of voice is a big deal. You have to be able to hear that because communication is made up 60 to 70%, the statistic changes every year, of body language, tonality, right? Being able to do those things. And I think when it comes down to getting to know somebody on an authentic level, they have to be able to show up and have a little bit of courage. If they're playing hide behind communication, where they're hide behind their text messaging and they're doing what I call impression management, and what starts to happen is they're just simply cultivating a perception, a persona. They want to be perceived a certain way. They may be actually afraid to be vulnerable, by the way. That could be a possibility, right? And this is where we start to get into what we call avoidant behavior, right? Behavior that's avoidant, which I'm sure you probably have a lot of clients coming to you with that, right? A lot of clients coming to, I have an avoidant, like, what do you do? And quite honestly, in my personal point of view, deciding whether or not a relationship with an avoidant-based person is healthy or not, like whether or not each person has to figure out, like, is this something that I should really kind of invest in or not invest in, right? Like, I grew up where communication was very easy. My family, we fought it out. We argued. When there was, we didn't hide behind stuff, right? We communicated. We didn't like what was said, but we came out and we say it. And the problems always got solved, at least 99.9% of the time. Things most of the time get solved. And people have a tendency to use their parental relationship, the relationship of their parents, as a model for their own relationship as to what they want. And then when they get into a relationship as an adult, they may realize that model may not work. It may not fall into line with that whole thing, right? So what I'm trying to get at is the key point is that when it comes down to avoidant behavior, sometimes that person who's an avoidant may have such emotional overwhelm that it's more about, it might be more about me bringing psychological safety, healthy psychological safety to the other person where they feel comfortable enough to open up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that in terms of like avoidant behavior and investing in that type of relationship and having some psychological safety. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
You have to know yourself well enough to know that that's something you want to deal with, first of all, because, there's people, I know a woman personally who's fine with that. She is fine with avoidant behaviors. She knows how to navigate it well. She doesn't necessarily seek out to fix or change this person or take them on as a project. But that's something she navigates well. well. And I feel like a lot of people don't even realize that they're in a relationship with an avoidant person until the feelings have developed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you know that that's maybe not your personality type and you wouldn't mesh well with someone like that, then, you know, you have to proceed a little more gently. But, and I will say this, you know, my family is like yours, very much, I wouldn't say argumentative, but very curt, very to the point.
Yeah.
There's no holding feelings
Bring
back.
it out, right?
And my husband's family is the opposite. They're very reserved, very quiet, and very thoughtful about their feelings. And even though we came from two different communication types, because there was so much else going on in the relationship that was workable, those two things we were able to build on over time to really meet each other. Yeah, to get where we were. So again, it's to your earlier point where it's like you're not just abandoning a relationship because of hardships, but as you get to know someone a little bit better, you may decide, this person's trying to meet me halfway, so I'm going to pursue it, or vice versa. You know, maybe they're not, and it's not the right fit.
Yeah, you know, there is a lot of studies behind the, you know, dealing with an avoidant behavior, and one of the things that actually comes up is not being so heavy on the questions. A lot of it could be very statement based, rather than hitting them with constant questions. It's more of just bringing up some very calm statements to kind of get a vibe and get a feel of kind of where they are in the whole thing, which really can be quite helpful in terms, again, because it's part of like making them comfortable, you know, in that way, rather than actually scaring them off. You're probably going to get, I'll tell you right now, you're probably going to get 100 clients after this show because, you know what I mean? Because there's so many people. I'm gonna make sure that when this goes out there, hashtag avoidant is all over this, right? So I'm gonna make sure of that. Now let's talk about divorce, because there's obviously people that get divorced and they have to start over, right? They have to be able to rebuild their life, right? And I've been through it personally. You know, I've spent probably about 5 years kind of moving past the divorce and starting over again, starting life all over again, right? And you know what? It did a lot. 5 years did a great deal of healing. And that was a number that I chose, by the way. I chose to say, you know what? I'm going to give myself about 5 years, 3 to 5 years to actually heal. And I look at relationships as they actually go through a cycle, right? You know, they go through courting. Courting is a cycle, right? And then there's finally breakup and divorce. That's also part of the cycle. That's towards the end. When it comes to divorce and heartbreak, you know, what insights do you think that people can take away from the pain of divorce, the pain of heartbreak?
Ultimately, you've hashed this over in your brain a million times once you're at the heartbreak or divorce point. And the ultimate takeaway is, what do you want to do next? What kind of relationship are you looking for next? What was in that relationship that you found worth, and that in that person's personality that you thought was amazing and awesome that you are looking for in your next relationship? And likewise, how have you grown since the divorce or the breakup in ways that would attract somebody who's closer to what you're looking for? Because you're wiser now. You've seen the beauty of a relationship. You've seen the pitfalls of a relationship, and you're a little bit more attuned to what a soulmate relationship really should look like than someone who's just coming into a relationship fresh. So I feel like you have to use your pain in a protective way, of course, to make sure that you're proceeding with caution and with love, but still with an open mind, but also using it to inform your next steps in a way that you can make the best of this and move forward with love into a relationship that really, really is a much, much better match for what you want going forward.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to somebody who has been divorced or heartbreak, like, you know, how do they rebuild, in your eyes, in your opinion, how do they rebuild their sense of self-worth after experiencing such a deeply emotional breakup? Like, what's been your experiences, your insight?
So I do have a process for releasing a relationship.
Okay.
And it's releasing that person. If you feel like time has passed and maybe you're still harping on the relationship, you're still not moved on from the relationship, it's an energetic release so that you can let that person go and start fresh. From a standpoint of self-worth, because the relationship is over doesn't mean that you're any less of a person than you were. And I know it's easier to say than to feel that you are still beautiful. You are still worthy of love. You are still capable of amazing experiencing things. And most importantly, you are still capable of loving someone new fully and wholly. It doesn't mean that you can't make one relationship work, so you can't make any relationship work. So I do genuinely feel like, especially for people getting divorced, one of the key things you have to do is really just love on yourself, give yourself some time to heal. Maybe that looks like self-care. Maybe it looks like spending more time with friends and family or your pets, but really filling your heart with as much love as you can stand so that you can see that you are a person who is able to take on the next challenge of finding and attracting your soulmate.
Yeah, absolutely. And now when it comes down to, because when it comes down to the breakup, is that some people might feel that sense of self-worth that's really low. And it's really important, and I want to say this to audience out there, it's so important to understand that you are enough. That is the phrase that you should put on a Post-it note and put it right on your mirror in the bathroom that you first see every single morning, especially when you've hit that rock bottom. Now, let's talk about soulmates. Now, to me, the concept of soulmates comes from the tradition of Kabbalah, Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism, where they said that two souls were once one before they came to this earth plane. They were split in half, and your soulmate went one place and you went another, and then they showed up on earth, and you spend your entire lifetime trying to find them, right? And we know and understand that there is a romanticized aspect of that. But what I like about your style and what you do is that you bring it to a very grounded place, because there's obviously people that can copy and paste their projection of a soulmate on every single person that they meet. It's like, oh, that's my soulmate, and their girlfriend is like, oh, wasn't that guy your soulmate last week? Right? You had somebody, right? So it's like, how do you define a soulmate, and do you believe that everyone has one? Is the big question.
I do. I believe everyone has one, and I believe that you need to be very slow in claiming someone as your soulmate.
All right, you got it.
Really slow. I mean, not just from a place of being reluctant to claim the love, but from a place of very deep discernment, because sometimes there's a wolf in sheep's clothing.
the narcissist in sheep's clothing. Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And at its core, the soulmate is the person that is attracted to you on a soul level. Yeah. And everyone has one. And it's scary to think that. And there's a lot of people who I've met who are even looking for their soulmate and don't really, really fully believe it. Yeah. This is someone who you are working through the tough parts of life with, celebrating the joyous parts of life with. This is someone that you can tell your goals and dreams and hopes and fears, and they are supporting you, and they are holding space for you and lifting up your vision, and you are doing the same for them every step of the way. More than just a partner, this person is the person that you are energetically joined with.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm really so glad that we're on this topic, because, I think I mentioned this to you before we started talking on the show, that I truly believe Coretta Scott King was literally much more than the wife of Martin Luther King. I feel like she was a soulmate in every sense of the word. And the reason why I feel this way is because I feel that their relationship was really rooted in shared values, right, which we discussed, mutual respect, that profound commitment to a huge vision that transcended their personal lives, right? And I feel like they were really there. I feel like when Martin Luther King himself had trouble, she was right behind him and say, what are you doing? Keep going. Come on, let's do this. Like she was like, not the cheerleader. She was the coach. Like she was really like, you got this. You can do this, and when he was down on his worst, she might have been known for that intellectual and emotional compatibility, that she shared that intellectual connection, discussing the theology, right? The strategies that he was going through. I don't think their conversations were confined to just personal matters. They were a broader struggle for humanity at the end of the day. And I really feel that it connected their mind and their heart, not just the heart, but their mind as well. And it's like, there's a lot of examples out there that I truly believe. There's a lot of different people. What are some of the green flags? Let's talk green flags. How do we green flag some people? Give me some green flags. Is that they're a soulmate, something that is going to be grounded in reality, not necessarily romanticized or projected. I'd love to hear it. I'm all ears now.
I would say number one not in any particular order, but the first one is, this is someone you feel comfortable being your truest self around, right? Not somebody you feel like you have to put on or pretend around. This is someone you can be your truest self, and they get you and they love you as you are. This is someone, when you're with them, you feel like you are in your safest, happiest place, and you're just looking forward to be with them and just completely comfortable with them. Also, in a more, I guess, overarching way, this is someone who I would say like maybe 80% of your core values, of your beliefs, you guys are in alignment on, right? It's not like you're on one side, they're on the other side, and there's a valley between you. This is someone who you genuinely feel like gets you and has similar motivations and goals to you. And then this is someone who also does what they say, and you are showing up in the same way. If you say something in a moment of, real vulnerability, they're not scared away. It's not terrifying to them.
Yeah.
And because they just want to know that you're seen and you're felt, and you are doing all the same things for this person.
For them, absolutely. Now that's pretty awesome. Now, what has been some of what has been some of the unhealthy myths, the myths behind soulmates that are out there? Well, I mean myths, the stuff that bring the unhealthy aspects that people fall into that could actually be a slippery slope, not really understanding the true principles behind soulmates. What's been your experience with seeing those things?
I think the biggest one is that because it's your soulmate, then everything is perfect. You don't fight. There's no disagreements. You guys are in 100% agreement on every single thing. And that your soulmate is just almost mythical level proportion of a unicorn. And also, I think a lot of people feel that, every single person who is a deep relationship with them romantically is their soulmate, is a huge myth.
They run into that, right? Wow.
Yeah. Because there's this kind of, thought process of, I've heard a lot of twin flames and soulmates, and some people use it interchangeably, but it really is not that. Your soulmate is someone who, you will have problems with, and you'll work on them, and you'll move past them and get past it. It's not this amazing relationship that makes everything else dwarf in comparison because it's so perfect. No, it's two people deciding to show up for each other every single day.
Yeah. I do wholeheartedly believe that when you meet your soulmate, they will challenge a process within you. What do I mean by that? I mean that, like, let's say there's some part of you that has to be let go and you have to grow. Like, there's got to be maybe some growth there. It doesn't necessarily have to be painful growth, but some growth can be painful, if you will. And I'd like to say that your partner might challenge that process in you to where you might have to let go of an old relationship ideology before you could perceive the relationship in a new light and be able to have that adventure with that person, right? That person, right? Now, when it comes down to values, we know that relationships are value matching, matching values. There's intrinsic values of on the inside. This would be like kindness, honesty, emotional connection, right? But then there's also extrinsic, right? These are like career goals, financial. Sometimes on the dark side of things, it could be like too much materialism, right? But emotional intimacy and trust are also critical, right? So those are intrinsic values, right? The emotional intimacy and trust. Where the extrinsic could be like the practical compatibility, right? And then there's the overall concept of the global values that are larger. For example, cultural norms or family dynamics or religious beliefs. Those are like more of the global, they're large scale values. So relationships, as you know, and we both know it, it's all about value matching. So how is it important for people to align on the core values as well as the practical ways to find out if they match your values? So like, how important is it to align on it, and how could they figure out if their values actually match without rushing the process?
I think value alignment isn't about a checklist. It's about how you both respond to what's going on around you in life. And there's always ways that this comes up, whether it's conversations of something you hear in the news or another couple is going through, or just some conversations you may have pillow talk wise.
Right.
But along the way, these conversations, A, come up, and they should come up, and they shouldn't be avoided.
Yeah.
But B, most importantly, are things you should be, paying attention to. Are you and and your partner seeing things the same way? Are you both in agreement on how, say a topic of family? Are you both in agreement on what family looks like and what your future looks like? And if there's disagreement on some things that, of course, have bigger rank and higher priority for you, can there be a middle ground? Is there a little bit of a deeper conversation or some more questions that you need to dig around to find out what the history is of that and if that's something valuable? These are all ways that we can pay attention to values and see if there is matching and alignment along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, here's something that's really fabulous, and I'm sure you've run across this. All right. So we know that a lot of the relationships have to do with value, of course, like matching of values, right? And obviously, I could figure out my own values by obviously reflecting myself, right? Prioritizing and understanding my own values. Communication, when we're dating, there's a lot of communication. There's value discovery, right? Where you discover the values. And sometimes just observing actions, which, by the way, I always say congruous behavior. The words should match the action as much as humanly possible. That's congruous behavior. When there's incongruous, is that what they say and what they do is completely opposite. So that's why observing actions are so important. It's accurate to understand their words and how they handle things, how they handle responsibilities and challenges and all of those things. That's to me is identifying, the values that are there. Now, I have to ask you this because I'm like, this is always a great one. How many times have you seen in your experience of coaching where one person has a value and they drop that value to get something else? So for example, well, he's attractive, he's gorgeous, he's wanted by everybody, but I'm going to drop this value because I value him being gorgeous more than his honesty.
Ooh.
Right.
Dropping something superficial for something.
Yes. Yeah. How many times have you seen that? Because I have 1,000 times. I got to hear it from you. How many times have you seen them drop a realistic, solid value in exchange for something superficial?
I'll put it this way. I've seen them want to, and this is where I coach them through it.
It's like, no.
I feel like there is a tendency to say but not do.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, that's where I kind of step in and say, wait a minute, when we first spoke, you wanted these things and you said it was important to you for this reason, and this person is not in alignment with that. Where is this wanting to change coming from? What is the foundation for this? And then we talk that out so that maybe that changes from a real place of introspection. I doubt it. But if it's not, just kind of pulling them back and saying, I'm not letting you off the hook until you examine what it is you're saying you want to switch this up to now.
Wow.
Let you off the hook.
Yeah, that's great. It's so true. Now, when it comes down to vulnerability, right? Let's talk about the pink elephant in the room, right? Vulnerability, because everybody hates vulnerability. It's like, I've always spoken about vulnerability as I use this sentence to describe it as no longer hiding parts of who you are.
Right.
All right. That's my definition for it, because there's a level of courage. I like to say courage and vulnerability are like close cousins in a way.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
Why is vulnerability essential for building the deep connections in relationships, and how can people cultivate it while overcoming, let's say, their own fear?
I think vulnerability is critical because you're sharing your life, your mind, your heart, sometimes even your physical space with someone.
Your inner world, right?
Yeah. Vulnerability can should lead to intimacy. And it's the step past just liking someone, right? You can like 1 million people or be attracted to 1 million people. But if you want to take that next step in a relationship, you have to drop that guard at some point and be willing to let someone in and be intimate by being open with them in that way. And you have to make that decision. You have to honor that decision to open up your heart and your life to someone by being open. And it just has to be where you're starting in even deciding that you want to be in a relationship. Because if you don't, then a relationship is not what you're looking for. You just want to date, and that's fine.
Right, that's
but
fine.
That's not what if you're trying to attract your soulmate, you're going to have to get real.
Yeah, I agree. And, something I always discuss, coming from a writing and screenwriting background, we always talk about a concept called the hero's journey. And what the hero's journey is nothing more than a universal narrative framework in which a hero goes on an adventure. They go through an adventure. And what I'd like to share is that vulnerability connects to that in real life, is that whenever we're vulnerable with our partner, that is literally crossing the threshold. All right. So when it comes to vulnerability, and that's what I'm basically trying to say, is crossing the threshold is like you're not in Kansas anymore, right? In order for you to reach the other side of that relationship, commitment, action, all those things, you have to be able to step into that vulnerability in order to get to the other side of stuff. That's basically what I'm trying to say. Now, let's talk. We talked about soulmates. Let's talk about finding soulmates from a grounded place. All right. So what does that mean? What does that look like? What does it mean to approach dating from a grounded place? Let's talk about that.
To me, that's from a place of you deciding early, before you even step into the relationship, you are complete. You've done a lot of work on whatever you need to work on to show up in a relationship fully, right? You have dealt with as many demons as you could deal with, and you have decided what you're looking for and who you are and how you're showing up to the best of your ability, because, we're all work in progress. And then you're choosing to be in a relationship. You are choosing to be with your soulmate and choosing this person. You're not just taking whatever comes your way, and you're choosing someone who's in that same place as well. So you're not having to chase a relationship. You're a solid human being showing up and saying that this is what I want, and I'm not stepping aside or doing anything less than this until I find that person who is like that. And if it means waiting, it means waiting. That's what grounded dating is to me. Just really making that soul-based decision to be as whole as you can be, to show up fully.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, can you share some actionable steps that someone could take to prepare themselves emotionally and mentally for finding a soulmate from like a grounded place?
I always think if you can afford therapy, always start there, right?
Yeah.
That's the first thing. There might be some traumas and some demons in your past that are much bigger that need to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And if you don't, there's always journaling, there's guided prompts, there's a lot of processes you can do. I even have a soulmate wish list blueprint that I do with my ladies to make sure that they're stepping into their search from a soulmate from a very grounded place in looking for someone beyond just looks and the superficial things. Meditation is always great.
Yep.
It's a great way to reflect. I personally really feel like if you can get to a place where you feel like you are whole and you can honor that, that's awesome. And if that means a combination of things, it might mean getting a little bit more esoteric, like sound baths or EFT tapping or prayer. There's so many different ways, and there's no wrong combination of ways, but just try a couple and see what helps you feel like you are really, really ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you could offer one piece of advice to somebody to search for a meaningful connection, meaningful love, what would it be if you had to give that out?
To show up knowing that what you want is possible, who you want is possible. And I think that's the foundation for all of it, because I speak to women who want soulmates and they say they want soulmates, but deep down they really, really, really don't know that it's possible. And that's the work that needs to happen.
To open the heart up, basically.
Open the heart and really get ready emotionally to attract someone beyond what you've done before.
Yeah. My modern day definition of opening the heart is I use one word, and that is receptivity. Because when one partner must open their heart to another, they have to learn to be receptive.
Right.
And what tends to happen, what's the opposite of receptive? To be closed, right?
Right.
So when they open their heart in a receptive way, they start to look at what's possible. This is not a grandiose perspective. This is opening up to the idea, maybe there is something here. Maybe this is possible, right? Bringing in a level of possibility to that. Because I've seen people with very closed off hearts. And they have difficulty with relationships because what a closed off heart does does is prevent their vision from seeing beyond, beyond what's possible. Right? Now, Kay, first of all, I want to say thank you for coming on to the show. And Kay, how do they reach you if they want your services and they want to get to know you and they want to talk to you and they need your coaching? How do they get in touch with you? How do they hire you? What do they do? What's your social media? Give it to us, and feel free to share any last final closing.
The best way to reach me is, I guess, by email, KAY at KAYVanDunk.com, or even through my website, KVanDunk.com, same spelling for everything.
Okay. And do they have any particular social medias that you'd like them to reach out to, or is it pretty much go through the website?
Yeah, go through the website. I'm just learning to lean into social media.
I got you.
I think, that's the fastest way.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Well, listen, Kay, first of all, thank you for coming on. You've enriched all of our listeners and you brought some beautiful things to the table. And I'm very thankful, grateful, and appreciative that we were able to even come on my show. And I want to make sure that this gets out there. This will be launched onto social media as soon as possible. So, Kay, thank you again and have a great day.
You too, Mario. Thank you.